Welcome back to Love, Life, and Legacy, the podcast dedicated to helping you navigate these hypersexualized times of ours, like mine and like yours. And today's episode, we're talking about standards, everybody. Standards are very interesting because we all have them, and a lot of times we don't know we have them in certain areas, or we haven't really written them down. We don't know what they are. We just feel them. And here's the thing. When you are developing yourself, when you're growing and evolving, when you're working on your sexual integrity and you're noticing some shortcomings, you're working on them, you're becoming a better, healthier person, you start to test new highs in your standards. And a lot of times when you do test that, you get scared and you retreat back to your old self. Or maybe you have a breakthrough, and you think this is the new me, and then you fall back down, and then you feel like, oh, I'm a failure, I'm just going to quit. This is all very much understandable. You can understand all these phenomenon, and that's what we want to talk about. Benji and I are going to talk about that this episode. So welcome, everybody. Welcome to your future. It's going to be a good one. Let's go. Welcome back to Planet Earth, everybody, starring Benjo Man and Andoru. Pam, pam. It is a day on Planet Earth, and you are here with us. Welcome. Oh, Benji, you went full Daffy Duck. Welcome, everybody. We are going to talk about standards today because what's crazy about standards, Benji, is like, if you have a crew, it could be your family. It's like, okay, these are the standards of our family. And then somebody deviates from those standards. It's like a crime. It's like, whoa. If they go way below, it's really like, whoa, that is totally not our standard. You feel it. You feel it like deep in you. And if they rise above the standards, like, oh, who stuck a quarter in this guy? What's this all about, right? So I wanted to get into that because there's a lot to unpack, I think, actually, because you inherit certain standards from your family, which might not be the standards that you want to maintain. Maybe you want to go way higher. Maybe you want to go way lower, right? So I want to unpack like the kind of external, how that might look, but also internally how that might feel, because there's a lot there, and it impacts us so much. Because we have so many standards that we haven't said out loud to ourselves, but they're there. And we're measuring everything against those standards, right? If somebody were to come up and be like, hey, you want a job? And you're like, I don't know, what is it? And it's like, it's picking up poo and you get 25 cents a day. All of a sudden, you're like, obviously not, right? Why? For some people, that's a fine job and that's good money, to be honest, right? So anyway, let's just going straight to the poo today. This is going to be one of those days. It's Friday. Let's go.
Sorry to our listeners that are picking up poo for 25 cents a day.
Yeah, shout out to you guys. Shout out to Andrew Jr. So, generally speaking, standards are the expressed or not expressed. Like I was saying, sometimes it's just intuitive. It's just you have it embedded in you. A sense of what's right or wrong, what's good or bad, and it guides your thoughts, your feelings. It guides your actions for sure. And a lot of us don't have clear standards. So that's one main outcome that I would hope that everybody has, is that you write out what are your standards and you figure out, are they good standards, or do I have really low standards? Do I want to raise my standards? And then the other thing, the metaphor that I wanted to sponsor this episode with, Benji, what brought this up is because if you care or not, it's a thing that's happening. There's this thing called cryptocurrency. I'm not going to get into it. Okay. But Bitcoin is doing stuff that people said it could never do. And because of that, people are like, told you so. And then other people are like, it's going to be $1 billion. And like, nobody knows the future, but everybody's got some sort of feelings, right? But if you look traditionally at any market, I suppose, but especially with crypto market, especially just talk about Bitcoin, whenever it wants to go to a new height, it first tests to see kind of like let's say 100,000. It just broke 100,000. It was like sniffing 100,000 for a while, and people were getting excited or fearful or whatever, and then it fell down, and then it got really close, and then it fell down, and then it broke through, and then it fell down, right? So it plays this game, and now it's, as of today, it's kind of right over 100,000. It's getting comfortable with this new height, and that doesn't mean it's going to stay there forever, but this is when I started really, looking at this stuff, I was like, this is people. Because if you like, as far as I can tell, the crypto markets are just the same as the stock markets. It represents a bunch of human activity. And so this idea that crypto gets close to 100,000 and then it falls down is like, what, is crypto alive and it has feelings? It got scared. It's like, no, people started selling off because they realized that they could make a bunch of money. And so they sell it off, and it's like human behavior en masse, right? So I just want to clarify that. But in terms of our standards, when we want to grow, and you'll see this in our Ascend course, people will be like, with their North Star goal, I want to be this kind of person. They'll have a really nice vision session with us, or they'll make a nice prayer, and then they'll maybe even say it out loud, and then maybe they'll even try it. But then they get tested, and then they fall back to their old ways, and like, I can't do this, right? It's so flippin' similar to, humans at scale, which is, visible through the crypto markets.
Yeah.
So I would like to know, my first question for you is, do you remember a time when you tested out a new standard and then you fell way back down?
Yeah, right now.
Give it to me. What?
Dude, like, Andrew, you and I we're always testing this stuff. So I'm like top of mind right now, this whole last month or so, maybe month and a half, I've been examining the reality, and I don't like talking about this because my ego doesn't want to talk about it. But
because you don't want to feel special?
I don't want to feel inferior.
Inferior?
Inferior.
Okay.
I would say that, well, my ego doesn't want it. But it's I have noticed a hard time letting go of control of certain things in life.
Like me, Benji? I want to be free. Leave me alone, Benji.
Yes, son. Yes, son. You can be free, but only under my terms. Okay? Like this type of thing.
You'll loosen the leash that you have on me?
Let me be specific. There are a lot of things I know that I'm not controlling over, and I just don't care about most things. But there are some very specific things that I have noticed I've been very trying to be controlling over, which is where the detriment or the cause of a lot of my stress and anger in my life I've noticed, specifically with relationships to the people closest to me, right? Specifically with my wife and with my kids. And for me, it comes up in the form of when my wife isn't how I want her to be on a particular day or a moment. Let's say, like yesterday, for example, she's really tired all day. Kojin was sick at home. She was with our 2-year-old all day. Kojin was not feeling great. He was really had a lot of energy, but he couldn't go outside to let it out. So he was kind of being what's the
weasel?
Word? A jerk. I don't know how to make this a PG.
We just in our house, we call the boys rats or weasels when they're acting as such. So
all right.
Something like that.
That's appropriate. Yeah, he was being a little weasel. And so Hito was tired. And I was noticing this. This is when I was testing my ability to let go of controlling her emotional state, her state of being, and letting go of control of that, and essentially accepting that this is how she is right now, and accepting everything about it. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
But my kind of controlling nature is like, I want to fix you. I want you to stop being tired and edgy with me and just be happy. Like, can you just be happy, right?
Yeah.
And it's come through, for many years actually in my the way that in my relationship with my kids, for example, right? It's like, kids are by definition immature and sometimes very selfish and weaselly. And so if they're fighting or someone is screaming or someone's having a bad day, my tendency was to wanting to control their environment and change them. And so it's conflicting because you can't change people. I can't change people. I can't control people. I mean, I can't influence them. And so it becomes frustrating. And so I'm saying this because it's like, it's something I've noticed. And I was like, well, that's not helpful, first of all. And second of all, it's not healthy. And third of all, that's not who I want to be. And so it's a state of being that I was for a long time. And it's only until recently I was like, that's me trying to be controlling, essentially, or not accepting. That's another way to put it, is not accepting people as they are today, right now. And so the challenge, I guess, where my limit, the standard has been challenged was like days like yesterday, where it was like Gita was having a tired day, and I noticed in myself like she's saying stuff, and I kind of want to just be like kind of challenge her, or say like you're wrong, or you need to rest, that kind of stuff. But I think it was the first step for me was just like acknowledge it and be like, okay, I need to take a step back for a second. I'm gonna go outside and I'm just gonna like calm down, like chill my nerves, breathe a little bit, look at the sky, because what I'm experiencing right now is a reactive energy, and I don't want to be negatively reactive. I want to be positively reactive. I don't want to be, I want to be reactive, but in like a loving reactive. Like if someone's having a bad day, I want to be like, oh man, like how can I love you more? Not how can I retreat, or how can I change you, or how can I
squeeze you until you're better.
Yes, exactly. Like I want to love bomb somebody that's having a bad day and have it not affect me, because I don't want to be a pathological, emotionless person that completely lacks empathy. I want to be able to respond to people, but in a way that I want to, in like a loving way. So that's one thing. Just very recently,
And this is important. This is actually extremely important. Benji, you're like the blessing guy. I just heard from another guy. Shout out to that dude. We had a one-on-one. He was a really cool guy. I don't want to say names because maybe they don't want me to say the names. But he was like, "Oh, I was just listening to Benji," and then he came to High Noon because he was listening to your BFM stuff. So in terms of the BFM, think about how important standards are in the matching, right? So. Yep. There's a couple ways of looking at this. One is you should, if you are single, listen to us very carefully. If you are very clear about your standard, it makes it so much easier to figure out that those are like foundational things to build a relationship upon. Because let's say you have a standard for your faith, and you have a standard for your health, and you don't want to eat junk food. You love praying and you have a life of faith, right? You clearly, it would mess with you. It's very difficult to then get into a relationship with somebody who get matched with somebody who doesn't have any standards for faith. And I don't know, I don't care, it's all stupid. Or they have no standards for food, because how do you build a life? You'll just have to build two parallel lives. It's really hard to kind of create synergy when you have completely different standards or different worldviews, right? But conversely, so I didn't know this when I was getting matched with my wife, and we had very different standards, and I just didn't care because I just believed in love, right? And what I was doing in that moment was I was setting myself up for maximal growth and maximal pain. And because what happens is I always was matching her to my standard, and only recently, through some really intense discussions with my wife, we both came to the conclusion that, yes, I've been kind of trying to raise her up to my standards in certain respects, but I've also been, in a way, through circumstance, being forced to rise up to her standards in terms of how loving and unconditional her love is, and how full of grace she is, and how petty and conditional my love is, right? So it's really painful. If you're going to set your standards really high and you want to get there, it's going to be painful, and that pain is entirely emotional and spiritual. It's the almost continual reminder of how small you are or can be. And you can only do that if you're up for it. And I don't think most people are up for it. That's like the fast track, and it's really quite painful, right? It's just the same as when I joined the church. Where I joined the church, how I joined the church, most people left because I was in the mood to have my butt kicked by life. And so I really was faced with how many wrong things I've done to other people, and I had to kind of rectify that in my heart. And it was 8 months. The first 8 months, it was just like perpetual a feeling of always being nervous because it was just like there's so much going on inside of me. But I grew so much, but not recommended. So if you are single and you haven't committed to somebody yet, please understand that your standards need to be clarified. And not like your express standards, like, yo, I'm gonna be a millionaire. No, that's not your standard. It's like, do you wake up in the morning? Do you keep your promises? These are your standards. Do you listen to people when they talk? Do you know how to get money and keep it or save it or invest it? That's like your money standards. Like there's the main categories of your life. You should have some idea of what your standards are. And you should have somebody in your life who's in the same kind of sphere. Because if they're kind of way outside there, it is possible to make it work, but it's going to be a painful ride. And for me, that pain came, like maybe 4 years into our blessing, and it was very intense, but it was like, again, another growth period. And I would not change anything. I love my wife more than ever because of what she's taught me, but I don't think everybody should sign up for that because not everybody needs that or wants it. I had a lot of back debt to pay off cosmically, and that's how I paid it off, by being slapped in the face by my own limitations. So your standards will show you your limitations, right? But the idea is to have like a very honest conversation with yourself, and ideally with close people in your life, to figure out what your standards actually are. Because you might have an inflated sense of self, especially if you're a guy. We tend to do that. We tend to think that we can take on the world when we can't even like take care of ourselves. I've heard a lot of people talk about world peace who do not know how to like walk around with a hair that's like remotely not crazy and that smell and like that kind of thing.
Yeah, especially if you're a dude and you're young. It's like the winning combo for I know everything and I'm right about life. It's crazy, dude.
Don't look at my results because I don't have any, but trust me, I know what I'm talking about.
I 100 believe when people older than me say, the older you get, the more you realize you don't know. And there's a paradox. It's called something. I forgot what it's called. But I know that now. It's just, I assume at this point in life that I just don't know. Probably don't know everything. Yeah. So I think when it comes to finding spouses, matching, there's a tendency to, I would say, over focus on, there are some standards that are more valuable in a relationship to focus on than others, right?
Sure.
Like, I mean, like probably a silly example would be like how you do your hair. It's like, I have a standard for how I do your hair. Cool. But is it as important as your standard for your relationship with God?
Yeah.
And how you live your life of faith? Like those standards, I think should be the big rocks that you input into the conversations with your partner. And as long as the big standards are aligned, the little ones will fit in eventually. It's like another way of saying that is make sure your end goal is the same with your spouse, like the end mission, whether it's we want to create a blessed family, a radiant blessed family, whether it's you want to, serve the community, whatever it is, that's aligned. But the nuanced ways of how you're going to get there and the small things, those are like negotiations, health standards, money standards, like that stuff changes over time and can change. And it's probably healthy that you kind of have give and take in conversations and settle on a standard, as opposed to both of you saying like, this is how I do money. And if you don't align with how I do money, it's not going to work. Like that's probably like focusing on the little rocks that probably don't matter, as if you're ignoring the big stuff. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, that's where people get tripped up. I've also seen the flip side where people are so overly focused on the kind of small things, the small standards, that they actually end a relationship that's perfectly beautiful and full of potential. Even though it's like, yeah, our big standards are aligned, our big values are the same, but we disagree on what we're going to do for our career or what we're going to do after university or that kind of stuff. It's like, I mean, that's negotiable for sure.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely like micro and macro standards. And yeah, I use money as an example, but then I was actually thinking about myself, and like my wife grew up in a country without money. There's literally no money. There's just, you get a ticket to go get bread and then you have to wait in line for 4 hours. And a lot of times they ran out of bread by the time. So there's no money. And then I had some idea about money, and then we've coalesced. But that was actually a subset of the macro, which is the main one, which is like, we are committed to making this blessing work. So those other ones are much more incidental. They're much more workable and negotiable. But the ones are like, is death do us part like a hard line statement that you like is scribed into your bones? And not just, we're never going to get divorced, but like, we're going to make this beautiful no matter what. That's a macro that if you commit to, the other stuff will get worked out because of it. So yeah, good point about micro and macro. And I can hear you tapping. Are you tapping on something?
Oh, my pen. Yeah. Tapping my pencil. Sorry.
Can you just stop it, Benji? Can you just stop being a therapist? Okay. So let's talk about, sexual integrity, right? Because this is a game that a lot of guys and gals play where they're really hopeful in a sense that life is going to change, but they're also scared, and they're also a little bit reluctant to invest too much hope, because what if they fail? Especially if they've already failed, air quotes, and they've kind of shot for the moon and they didn't get what they wanted. So they made some bold statement in their North Star goal, and then they went back to porn. So they feel like a failure. So they're reserved in their optimism. In such cases, Benji, do you have any recommendations as to how somebody can kind of like raise the limits? Like in the gym, you just add another plate and you're getting stronger little by little. How do you do this with your standards? How do you raise your standards little by little? Or how do you test that limit? Again, I feel like the crypto analogy is useful. And for anybody who hates crypto, deal with it. It's a metaphor, okay? But this idea of like testing the limits, you're sniffing the line, you're like almost there, and then you fall short, and then you bust through, and then you fall back down. Like, how do people navigate that emotionally when it comes to sexual integrity?
Well, let's see. Conversation today with a fine brother in our Ascend program. He just asking him how this cycle of Ascend was, because we're just wrapping it up right now, and he said that he feels like he hasn't progressed at all. Okay. And I said, okay, well, what does progress mean to you? Right. And he said, well, I've been slipping up, maybe slipping up less, but I'm still slipping up every time I'm stressed with school, relationships, that kind of thing. And so in this conversation, I realized that I would say the vast majority of people that come into sexual integrity training from the beginning have a skewed understanding of what progress means. And meaning that the primary emphasis or the primary metric of what they think success is sobriety itself, right? Which is sure a metric, but if that's the only thing, which is mind-blowing how disproportionately focused people are on sobriety. It's like, It actually blows my mind, Andrew. Like, there was a guy going to Las Vegas in the airplane, and he was going to Vegas to celebrate a year of sobriety from alcohol. And I was like, what? Like, I'm not saying it's not a good thing to track. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying it's probably like secondary or third area. Tertiary. It's like, I can't believe we still live in a universe where sobriety, anyways, off my soapbox for a second. So I was talking to this guy, and I was very kind. I was like, well, what else have you learned about yourself this quarter or this cycle? And he said, well, I feel like I'm like 25% more self-aware of his emotional state. And I was like, I honestly think self-awareness is probably a better way to track your progress. I honestly, God, think so. It's like, if you can observe that I feel stressed earlier on, way before you're at the edge of a cliff about to jump off, metaphorically speaking, with porn, way before that, it's like noticing, like, I just feel stressed and I'm going to do something. I don't want to let stress dictate my internal nature, my internal world. I want to be something different, and then just decide to do something in that moment. Like, if you can do that, that's way better. If you can get stronger at that. And I told him, like, look, dude, success with sexual integrity looks like just becoming more and more and more and more self-observant. And eventually you will just not even want to go to porn because you'll just know that it's not going to help you. You just have evidence from experience. Like, this is not going to make me feel better. I already know that. And I'm just going to go a different route way before it becomes a problem and you're about to call your AP and say, hey, I'm about to act out. Help me out. It's like, no, that's not when you get help. That's not when you decide to do something different. So that's the first thing I would say is just really an overemphasis on, in, you know, societally, culturally speaking, on counting days of how long you can go. And it's such a, I want to say it's a waste of energy, to be honest, to be abrasive. It's like, it's such a waste of energy if caveat, it's the only thing that we're looking at in terms of growth.
Yeah, it's definitely a resultant metric. So yeah, I guess that's an interesting thing because people are measuring the standards of their sexual integrity by the external results rather than their standards of self-awareness, like you're saying. Like, how aware am I about, do I understand why I do the things I do? Do I understand what to do when I'm not feeling great? Like, how to navigate that? That's a much better standard to work on because, again, that's like micro, macro. Like, the result of watching porn is more micro. It's influenced by the macro. The macro, in this case, standard that you'd want to work on is kind of like self-love.
Hey, if you happen to be a single person that wants to prepare well for marriage, for the matching, for the blessing, then my friend, we actually have a program just for you. It's completely free. You can join the core program at highnoon.org. We're going to take you through the stages to figure out, what does it mean to be a marriageable person? What does it mean to be ready? How do you actually prepare for marriage and the blessing? Check it out at highnoon.org. Join us in the program called Core. All right, see you there.
And when you fall out of love with yourself, how do you talk to yourself? How do you deal with that? That's a life skill that will influence you forever and in pretty much every aspect of your life. Whereas sexual integrity is one aspect of your life, and it's the result of a wider dysfunction. You don't just have a problem with sex if you're watching porn. You have some emotional stuff that's manifesting through sex. So you fix that. You learn how to like heal that and work on that and make it healthy again. Then not only does your sexual integrity improve, your whole life is raised up. That's a macro. And so, yeah, again, a good point. And so then how do people raise their standards, Benji? I'm going to go back to my question. How do they actually raise their internal standards? Let's say a macro internal standard like self-love, self-awareness. How do they raise their standards? Like, what's a practical thing that they can do? Because it does seem a little esoteric unless we break it down to some practicals.
I don't know.
You,
I think, well, it's like, I think the first question is, do I want to raise my standards? Especially if we're talking about sexual integrity. Because it's a very subtle yet undiscussed thing that, let's say on the macro big scale, it's like, yeah, I don't want porn in my life because it's caused me so much suffering over the last decade or decades. But on the day-to-day level, it's like we throw out that sentiment so quickly and succumb to the feeling of like, you know what, but I feel stressed, but I feel bored, but I feel lonely, and it'll make me feel better, right? And so I would ask the question, like, do you want to raise your standards, first of all? And if so, the standard you have to raise has to be not, do I watch porn, do I not watch porn? It has to be like, do I ever engage in any type of sexual content, even in my mind, like at that level? That's the kind of level I think people should strive for, especially if it's, you know, for a lot of people, it's preparing for marriage, matching, blessing. For a lot of people, it's, you know, spouse, you know, if you're married already, it's because you want to offer something to your spouse. And what I usually tell people is that it's not enough to do something for somebody else, because then it becomes just about not watching porn. Where in reality, it has to be a lot deeper than that. It has to be a lot more like, I want to make my entire focus about my spouse, my energy, my mind, my thinking, not even any of it go to any type of sexual nature. Because if it's only for not watching porn or watching porn, then it can very quickly become like, well, I'm going to go on Instagram and just, you know, scroll around mindlessly, and then I'll go check out this profile. And before you know it, you're like watching this TV show that's a little raunchier than you should be watching, you know? And so that's the standard, is like, well, it's not porn, and so it's okay. And so I think that a big step for a lot of people with sexual integrity is actually saying, I need to raise my standard. It just in terms of like the kind of stuff I view or allow myself to consume, right? And so for me, my standard is like, I don't even go on Instagram because that's all porn to me, honestly. Like most of the stuff that the algorithm's trying to feed me is like borderline sexual stuff. I mean, it's like, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's
shout out at highnoon.org on Instagram. Check us out.
High Noon Life.
Oh my God, I didn't even know.
Yeah, at High Noon Life. Yeah, we got the clean stuff, but like my algorithm still thinks I'm interested in that stuff, so I try to stay off of it. But you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just that's like my standard with content is just like, I don't even want to engage in that stuff personally.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about what is your standard for social media, like what are you really there for and what do you need? Is there anything that you actually need from it? I don't think you are tapping again.
I'm not. Oh, sorry.
There are some useful things. Like on Instagram, I follow a lot of health related people and AI related people just to understand more deeply these things. But I have to be careful because if I'm there, I mean, the algorithm doesn't just feed me what I want. It feeds me what it wants. So if I'm looking for something, I got to make sure I get in, get out, right? So what is my standard? I have a different standard than Benji because I have a different relationship with social media, right? And that's why this is, I'm noticing that all the most important stuff in life has no blanket solution. If anybody says that there's one diet that everybody needs to be on, you need to put that person on a rocket ship and send them off this planet because they're destructive. It's just this monotheism of different beliefs about different things. It's really individual. You have to go on this journey. You have to find out you're tapping again.
What?
I'm hearing some sort of tapping. Sorry, everybody. We're hearing noises. I'm hearing noises. Maybe it's a ghost. We are trying to establish what is healthy for us based on a vision. So the vision is paramount that is like your canvas, and you're painting the closest thing that you can do to a healthy life on that. So, and then that's like your vision, and then the standard allows you to attain that vision. It allows you to kind of do the work. What is like the day-to-day, the ground, hour-to-hour work? It's how you're spending your time and energy. So what are your standards, right? So another thing that I wanted to touch on was how much easier it is to maintain a standard when you have other people who have the same standard, right? This is difficult because in our society, if you have high standards, you will be the odd man out or odd woman out more often than not. Because most people don't have any express standards about food, about money. They're reacting. These are not standards. If you're still reacting, you have no standards. Or you have very low standards. It's only when you have a vision that, let's say food, and you're somewhere and somebody's like, hey, you want to eat this? And you're like, no, I don't eat that. That means that you have a standard. If somebody's like, hey, here's a thing, and you're like, is it poison? And they're like, I don't know. And you're like, okay, let's try it, right? Then you don't really have any standards, I guess, for health. So it's so helpful to hang out with people who are at the very least striving for the same standards as you. It's a crapshoot. It depends on how determined they are and how genuine their desire for those standards are. That will determine whether it's ultimately helpful. Because I have seen, Benji, I'm sure you have as well, a bunch of people who are faking it until they make it together and it all falls apart because they don't actually have that standard. They're like just like holding their breath trying to make it real. But it's much more helpful if you can find people who have that standard in that particular way. So if, again, back to health, to hang around super healthy people, it's quite obvious if you have a Snickers bar in your pocket and you're hanging out with like really healthy people because it will burn in your pocket. You're like, I have a secret. And whether you eat it or not is incidental. It's just the fact that now it's very clear that you are not living up to that standard. And it should never be about judgment or anything like that. It's just about standard. And with sexual integrity and like They say that, as a married person, if you hang around with enough divorced people, it really influences your marriage negatively, right? And it doesn't mean that you disown your divorced friends. It just means you have to have a balance, because your standard is impacted by your environment. So if you are trying to become a person with sexual integrity, you need to hang out with people who are further along the way, and it'll make it so much easier for you. And that's what our network is here for. It's like we're trying to make ourselves as accessible as possible, within the staff, within the volunteers, with everybody, because that's how we all level up, right? We all are working on our standards, but some of us have been at it a little bit longer, and we're used to a higher standard. It's just like when you get older, you have different standards about like living conditions, right? When you're 19, you will sleep on a dog if you must, right? Because it doesn't really matter. And when you get a little bit older, it's sometimes a little harder to fall asleep. So you need at least some sort of comfortable bed, maybe ideally with air conditioning if you're in a tropical place. But like that, your standards raise usually as you get older. And so internally too, we're challenging you all to do a standard inventory. What are your standards for the macros? Benji, let's sort out what are the macros. So things like with marriage, it's like the one thing that I can hang my hat on, my soul on, with my blessing, and what's gotten us through the tough times is our mutual belief in the blessing itself, and our commitment to the blessing. That is not even about us. It's about this thing that we're committed to, this blessing. It's about the people who invested in our blessing. It's about the people who invested in my wife, her lineage, her family, her father who's in spirit world, like all these people. So that the sacredness of our relationship with the blessing itself has gotten us through our own personal limitations, right? Do you have any other macros that you believe are super important in terms of standards?
I would say relationship with God and spirituality. Just, another way of saying kind of how we relate with the inner immaterial world of spirituality. Yeah, whether that's God, ancestors, Chumbo, whatever floats your boat, but that type of world stuff.
It's definitely a lot more helpful. Like when I was getting matched with my wife, she wanted to, her only criteria was not a churchy guy, because she was just really burnt out on everything. She lived in a van for 10 years and just fundraised for 10 years, and she's done with it all. And so she's like, just anything but that. And then I was the most churchy person in the world at that point. And then, I had this crazy high standard. It's like no sleep, just pray all day, just like go. Looking back at pictures, I'll show you, I was the skinniest person, and I don't know why. I was eating a lot, but I think I was just never sitting down. It was either praying or running around. I was on fire. Just kyumbang until my knees popped off. And that was not advisable again, but we made it work. You can make these things work. It's just, do you want to put yourself in that boat? So we had very different spiritual standards, and eventually she not only rose to my standard, but surpassed me by a mile. And she's kind of lived in that. I feel like she's much closer to God than I am. I'm always stressing out and trying to fix things on earth, and she's just living in heaven all the time, right? But so it can work, but it's not advisable, people. So yeah, spirituality is like, you should have a similar idea of the importance of spirituality. The expression of spirituality should be negotiable. Again, that changes over time too. How you pray, when you do Hundake, if you do Hundake, that stuff evolves over time. Sometimes people take a break and then they come back with a vengeance. Who knows? But the idea is that if you just say that God is a non-negotiable, and how we get to God, we'll figure out over time, that's powerful.
Yes, Hitoe was very similar. Her only deal breaker, only one, was that she doesn't marry a pastor's son. Because apparently at Sun Moon in Korea, pastor's son are just the worst rebellious or stuck-up people you've ever met. And she didn't want that. And that's exactly what she got. I am the absolute pastor's son. So there you go.
But you're the pastor's second son. Maybe that helps.
Maybe it does help. But I was the extreme of like, talk about standards. I did a 40-day when I was in BTA, which is a gap year program. I did a 40-day no looking or talking with sisters for 40 days.
Wow.
And they hated me because
Yeah.
maybe I wanted that subconsciously, but they hated me. I was just like, they'd be like, "Hey, can you help with this?" And I would just completely ghost them, just like walk right past, ignore every single woman in the house.
It's kind of like you were in Sixth Sense and you were pretending like they were Bruce Willis. They were some ghost that you're just ignoring.
Just like, you know, how kids pretend to ignore you. Just like,
Yeah.
I did what? Yeah.
And it worked, right?
Okay.
So again, it like the idea is that it can work. It's just not advisable, guys and gals.
Yeah. other
But that's
categories-
hopeful. I mean, honestly, Benji, just shout out to you and working through that. And that's a shout out to anybody who finds themselves in, they feel like really stressed out about their marriage, their blessing is, you know, it's still workable. Even if you have incredibly different standards, it is. If you're already there, there's a reason why you're together and you can salvage it. You can make it so much better. It's just a little bit of a rougher road, but guess what? The spoils are greater as well because you get to claim a victory that if things are easy, you don't get to have. So Benji and I had a very similar track with our different manifestations, but very similar results and feelings where the only reason we are standing here today is because of the challenges we faced in our marriage. They were there for us, you know, for our growth, and we value them, but it's not everybody's cup of tea at all, right?
Yeah, man.
Sorry, I just had to clarify that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking of standards in terms of internal, external. I guess the internal stuff is pretty covered. The blessing, I mean, that's kind of mix of both worlds. It's a very external thing. I mean, how we express our relationship, but it's also very internal. Health comes to mind is really important for many internal and external reasons, right? To live and enjoy and have energy, but also just to kind of view your body as a temple of God and yeah, we do that.
Yeah, it's like a medium. I'd say there's like macro and then medium and then micro. And I would put health at a medium because it's very important, but it's very negotiable, especially in your 20s. You don't really, you could not care that much about health and not pay if you're generally healthy, you don't pay too many consequences in your 20s. It really starts to catch up in your late 20s, early 30s and that kind of stuff. That's when you gotta, my wife and I took a long time to really get on the same page about health, right? When I met her, she said the words, "I don't like salads." And I said, "Excuse what?" And then I found out later that the only salads she's ever had in her whole life were from McDonald's because in Mongolia they didn't have salads growing up. So then I introduced her to salads. She's like, "This is good. What is this?" And I was like, "This is the thing that she said you hate." But so it was all a negotiation. So I think, medium. I put that at medium.
Gotcha. Well, health can also be a very internal experience. And this took me a long time to be convicted in, is that many times we're very unaware of how our health is affected spiritually and internally speaking.
Sure.
Like there's a lot of disease and, it's hard to point at, but I know a lot of people will point to spirituality as the cause of all, ailments, but there is a lot to do with, the spiritual inner world of our health and our bodies.
Yeah, absolutely.
I believe that, just like there was this really famous example of a 10-year-old that was murdered, right? Not in our church, just for clarification. And she gave a heart transplant to an 8-year-old, because the 10-year-old passed away, and they didn't catch the murderer, but so they gave the successful transplant to the 8-year-old girl, and the girl started having very vivid dreams of being murdered, right? And the parents of this 8-year-old girl took her to the authorities, and they identified through this girl's dreams the murderer, place of murder, weapon used, and they caught the perpetrator through this girl's dreams, right?
Amazing. Yeah.
Which is incredible because of the heart, the literal organ was carrying some kind of spiritual energy, vibration that
Memory.
influenced this little girl memory, like this imprinted memory that influences this little girl's dreams, right?
Yeah.
And I heard that, I was like, that's insane. Like that's one of the more famous examples of this, but there's tons
Sure.
and tons of stuff. Just how spiritually we're influenced in our body.
Yeah. You know, we talk about the 5 virtues, but in terms of the mind, the heart, the spirit, and the body, right? So that's a good kind of rubric, I would say, to start in terms of standards. What are your standards in terms of 5 virtues? And then what are your standards in terms of your mind, your heart, your spirit, and your body, right? So your mind is like, you know, how much do you want to learn in your life? How much do you want to expand your awareness of what is true or false, or how much do you want to care about certain things? Heart is like, yeah, learning. How much do you want to mature? All these 4 areas should always be taken care of and growing, but how much emphasis do you actually want to put in your life? And what is your standard for relationships, for learning? Do you want to be a lifelong learner, or do you want to be a supadoi, as they say in the Dogman books? Supadoi. Everybody gets stupid in that book at some point, and they all say supadoi, supadoi. So funny.
Yes, I know it well.
So yeah, I think that's, you know, because we could go in a billion different directions, but the main macros that we identified are kind of your commitment to the blessing and your relationship with God. And then anything else, you could see it through the 5 virtues: honesty, accountability, grace, integrity, courage. And also through the lens of mind, heart, body, spirit. Okay? And through that, I think that's a great start. And all the other ones, the micros and all that, it's good to know for yourself. What are your standards with money? What are your standards with sleep? What are your standards with social media and your phone? The phone is a big one. If you don't have a standard with technology, then your standard is being devoured by technology. Just, it owns you and you're not even aware. So, you know, these kind of things, if you look at your life, the main aspects of your life, you can look at a week of your life. What are the main things that you're focused on? What are your standards for those things? A lot of people want money and they don't have any discipline with money. So you have no standards. You just are left with desires. That's a recipe for pain and suffering, right? So I think we'll leave you at that. I mean, standards, we can revisit this later, but if you want to, one last thing is part of this metaphor is a lot of times when you're testing out a new standard, everybody, the people in your life are shocked and sometimes appalled. They don't like this new you because it's new and they don't like new things. They want you to be the old you. So if you're a shy person and you want to be an outgoing person, in the beginning, it's going to seem weird to you and it's going to seem even weirder to them. And people will give you this look and it'll make you feel really judged. And it's only because you're evolving and growing. That's you testing this new kind of version of yourself, right? And a lot of people get a negative response from their environment, however it looks, and then they retreat back to their old selves. But you should be constantly evolving in probably deeper ways than, just being shy, but like trying out being a more pious person, a more humble person, to apologize more, to be more grateful, these kind of things. A lot of people, if you're known for being kind of a sarcastic person and you want to work on sincerity, people will respond momentarily negatively because they're like, this is not you. This is not you. And you'll feel almost guilty because it's like you're betraying them, but you're not. If you're becoming more of your true self, you're not betraying anybody. You're just growing and they'll get used to it. And that's you testing your standards. So when you raise your standards, you will experience resistance from your environment. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And it's definitely not the time to retreat. If you're really clear about you raising your standards, you're not just like, I'm going to be a goth or something like that. That's not raising standards. That's just going through some weird phase. But raising your standards will involve you changing, and that change will be met with resistance from some people. It could be it's usually the people closest to you. I got attacked by so many people when I became religious because they're like, you can't do that. You hate religion. And I said, well, I guess I don't anymore. And they said, well, we don't want to be your friends. I said, well, great. Thank you for showing who you really are. Now I can move on, right? And it was painful, but ultimately it was so liberating because I was leveling up and I didn't even know it, right? So when you evolve into a more sincere version of yourself, that's you raising your standards, and your environment will be challenged by it. The people, even your dog, might be like, who's this guy? And you just have to be like, it's still me, buddy. I'm just more confident. And it'll be like, okay, I'm going to go back to sleep. So I hope that makes sense. Please expect some challenge either by the universe in the form of like, today I'm going to be confident. And then the first thing out of bed is somebody yells at you and you challenge, right? That happens a lot. When you make some bold proclamation to the universe, it's like, you want to see what it's like? And it challenges you. But it could also come in the form of people making comments, or like your parents being like, oh, I don't know about this new version of you, this kind of thing. If it's sincere and if it's God-centered and it's about evolution, just keep it up. Just keep it up and you'll find your way.
Cool. Sounds good. I love it. Dig it.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here with us. And we will be with you again on a further date, on a later moment in time and place and history. God bless you. God bless your eyes, your eyebrows, and everything in between. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh yes, Benji here, guys. If you've benefited from this episode and you love the podcast, then please consider becoming a donor for High Noon. It is a special privilege to be a donor. If you want to donate just $10 a month or $20 a month or $100 a month, if you want some way to contribute to something really, really impactful and you have some cash to do that, then please let High Noon be that for you. We welcome you. We are still a nonprofit, and we use all the funds to help support our programs, to change the lives of lots of people and travel the world and do epic stuff like that. So please go to highnoon.org/donate and please help us out. All right. See ya.